Ahoy captains, and welcome to what will be the first of many shipbuilding guides for Windward Horizon. Now that I've finally managed to drag myself away from the intoxicating highs of player vs pirate sea battle, it's time to share some of what I've learnt before I inevitably take a pirate cannonball to the face and am lost to Davy Jones's locker forever. Today we'll be deconstructing my Diplomacy Galleon build, not only so you can see an example of a build that is fully capable of soloing 4-skull content, but also to give you a deep understanding of why I've built my ship in this specific way, arming you with a deep knowledge of game mechanics that you can take away and use to improve your own builds. We'll be looking at every aspect of the build: lower deck configuration, top deck mortar choices, top deck captain and first mate skill choices, talent point distribution, faction choice, and gameplay hints sprinkled throughout to help you maximize this build's effectiveness in combat. Whilst we deep dive into this information, the footage playing in the background is a recording of my stream, where I successfully completed a solo 4-skull on the Tessarian multiplayer scaled difficulty server with the very Galleon build that we are discussing today. So you will have to excuse Pastay, he's just going to be chilling in the corner down there this whole time. You've probably figured it out already, but the crux of a Diplomacy Galleon build is in fact your diplomacy stat, which for us sits at a massive 726%. This stat scales the damage done by Explosive Barrel and Grogolov Cocktail, our two methods of dealing damage, and scales the healing done by Water Barrel, our only source of healing. With diplomacy this elevated, we can pump out insane levels of AoE damage and AoE healing, staying alive through the most brutal of pirate onslaughts. But how did we get our diplomacy stat this high? Let's have a look at our lower deck. Eagle-eyed viewers will see that we are not running any cannons on this ship. Rubbish, put them in the trash, we don't need them. We have our 2 required sails, our 4 required hull, but every other slot is taken up by crews and crates, and this is where the bulk of our diplomacy comes from. But it's not just about throwing all that gear anywhere on the lower deck. Our configuration is specifically designed to maximize adjacency bonuses to push the limits of what is possible within the bounds of diminishing return stat calculations. The adjacency bonuses we are taking advantage of are our sails, giving plus 35% diplomacy to adjacent crews, and our crates, giving plus 70% diplomacy to adjacent crews. Let's zoom in on our central row of crews and really examine what's going on here. Each of these crews has a base diplomacy of 70%. On top of that, they are all receiving plus 35% from the foresail and another plus 35% from the aft sail. On top of that, 2 out of the 3 crews are receiving plus 70% from the port crate, and 2 out of 3 crews are receiving plus 70% from the starboard crate. So just looking at the central part of our ship in isolation, before diminishing returns and before top deck multiplications, these 3 crews, 2 sails, and 2 crates have a raw diplomacy stat value of a whopping 700%, all thanks to taking full advantage of sail and crate adjacency bonuses. Our remaining 3 crews, also receiving adjacency bonus from sails and crates, are adding another 280%, 210%, and 210%. For a total pre-diminishing returns and pre-top deck buff of 1,400% diplomacy. But maxing our diplomacy is not all this configuration does, no. We are also taking care to boost, or at least not significantly hurt, 3 other stats that are important to us: haste, luck, and armor. We care about haste because it reduces the cooldowns on all our abilities, as a result increasing both our damage output and our healing output. Despite suffering adjacency penalties by having 3 crews stacked next to each other, with every crate on our ship providing plus 35% haste to adjacent crews, all our crews end up providing a positive haste stat, with our 3 non-adjacent crews carrying most of that load. Luck is the stat that increases your critical chance, so just like haste, it is directly boosting our damage and healing outputs. Luck is gained from sails and from adjacency bonus provided by our crews to our sails, but only when directly bordering aside, not diagonal. So compared to a standard Galleon layout, we are missing plus 35% luck from the aft sail due to not having a crew in this slot. However, this small sacrifice to luck is worth it for the stat gains we get to diplomacy, haste, and armor. We will also be using another method later on to boost our luck stat, so we don't really need to rely solely on the lower deck, so do keep that in mind for when we talk about luck later in this video. A final note for lower deck luck, make sure your best luck crew is placed in the very central spot for maximum adjacency bonus, as this slot applies luck to both sails simultaneously. This is most applicable when you are ranking up your crews, and your stats might be a little all over the place. Our final stat of concern is armor. Each of our hull pieces has a native plus 35% armor, with both paladin crates also providing a plus 35% adjacency bonus. We could boost this further by using defensive or balanced hull pieces, however neither of those have any mobility stat like our currently equipped pieces do. Whilst mobility isn't an essential stat for this build, decent mobility does offer significant in-combat advantage and is generally just a lot nicer to play with when you can control your ship in a responsive way. But why do we care about boosting our armor stat in the first place? Sure, it helps our survivability, but the true reason to boost our armor stat is because it boosts our damage. How? Well, it's time to talk about our top deck, specifically our captain skills. Shrapnel is a captain skill that converts all your armor over 100% and puts it into mortar damage. Thanks to the work we did boosting our armor and diplomacy stat on the lower deck, activating Shrapnel takes our explosive barrel tooltip from an impressive 47k to a ridiculous 72k. Whilst activating Shrapnel does reduce our defenses, the old adage of offense is the best defense definitely holds true for Windward Horizon, and using Shrapnel is 100% worth the trade-off. To help get more bang for your buck out of Shrapnel, you'll notice we're also running a Paladin Captain instead of the traditional Diplomacy Captain. This guy gives us plus 70% Diplomacy and plus 70% armor, multiplying the base level stats we set up on the lower deck. Now is a good time to mention, a plus 70% stat on your captain or first mate is not just adding a flat 70% like a crew on your lower deck does. No, your captain and your first mate stats are applied multiplicative to your lower deck, so it's very important to make sure your top deck is applying their big multiplicative bonuses to your primary stats, and any negatives that they have are the stats you do not care about. In our case, the Paladin Captain is minus in damage, we don't have cannons, so losing damage is of zero concern, and minus in repair. We have huge water barrel cools on a short cooldown, so a negative repair stat is inconsequential to our survivability. Anyway, back to our other captain skills. Our second skill is reset cooldowns. Every 30 seconds, reset all cooldowns that have 5 seconds or longer on their duration. This skill is essentially doubling your burst damage every 30 seconds, allowing you to take down a particularly tanky target or to engage a larger group of pirates than your firepower would usually allow. As our explosive barrel cooldown is sitting at 3.7 seconds, less than the 5-second threshold required by reset cooldowns, you'll always want to use a Grogolov cocktail before activating reset cooldowns, essentially giving you a free cast every 30 seconds that avoids its natural lengthy cooldown. Our third and final captain skill is Lucky Coin. This is why we didn't have to worry about losing a little bit of luck on our lower deck, because we are getting a whopping 100% crit chance and a plus 200% critical damage boost from this skill. Unlike cannon builds that boost their critical damage by investing into the accuracy stat, Lucky Coin is the only significant way for a mortar build to increase critical damage, so this skill is a must-have for any serious diplomacy ship. Whilst I am ride or die on these 3 captain skills for a diplomacy build, if you'd like to learn more about other captain skills, you can watch my captain skills tier list video, where I examine the use case of every captain skill in the game. Link is in the description. But what is a captain without his trusty first mate to keep the crew in line? In our case, we are running a simple diplomacy first mate, adding to 3 out of 4 of our critical stats: diplomacy, haste, and luck. More interestingly though, are our first mate's skills. Let's start off with the single most impactful one in the game: Element of Surprise. Upon entering combat, plus 100% mortar damage for 4 seconds. On paper, might not sound too mind-blowing, but due to this multiplier applying at the very end of the damage calculations, it is straight up doubling the damage you do for 4 seconds at a time. This skill is the reason everyone spams fog clouds in group battles. But before you get PTSD from being yelled at in instant chat by people who at the time didn't understand the true power of fog plus element of surprise, let me go on a very quick tangent and mention. If you are struggling with getting fogged out by allies or pirates, simply turn off auto-targeting on your cannon and mortar skills, and that will allow you to freely shoot into and out of fog clouds. With this simple change, you'll learn to not only love fog, but to thrive in the fog. Anyway, back to element of surprise. The Galleon, having 2 mortars with ridiculously low cooldowns, is uniquely positioned to take full advantage of element of surprise, more so than any other ship in the game. If you can get your key presses fast enough, within a single 4-second element of surprise window, you can fire off 3 fully buffed mortars, consisting of 1 Grogolov cocktail and 2 explosive barrels. Let's have a look. At 0 seconds, you enter combat, proccing element of surprise. At 0.1 seconds, when you notice you've received your element of surprise buff, you immediately trigger your 2 captain buff skills, shrapnel and lucky coin, and then fire off a Grogolov cocktail. At 0.2 seconds, you hit reset cooldowns and immediately follow up with an explosive barrel. Then at 3.9 seconds, your explosive barrel naturally comes off cooldowns and you can fire it off again. This all results in 1 fully buffed Grogolov cocktail and 2 fully buffed explosive barrels, all fired off within the 4-second element of surprise window. Obviously the timings here are very tight, and even with my ridiculous amounts of hours in the game, I'm far off from executing this flawlessly every time, but it's definitely a skill rotation that you should strive for. A more accessible variation of the above is simply skipping Grogolov cocktail and reset cooldowns, and focus on firing off your explosive mortar barrels fast enough that you can get 2 buffed within the 4-second element of surprise window, and this one is a lot easier to achieve. You can also, and should, chain these 2 rotations together using Fog Cloud to re-proc element of surprise whilst you are in the heat of battle. So in an ideal rotation, you can fire off 1 Grogolov cocktail and 4 explosive barrels, all fully buffed with element of surprise, shrapnel, and lucky coin within an approximate 8-second window. Now I totally understand if that is too overwhelming. If that's the case, then just focus on this small part of the rotation that's a little bit easier to pull off. Our final 2 first mate skills are Top Shelf Powder and Cheat Death, and don't worry, I don't have nearly as much to say about these 2 skills. Top Shelf Powder is a simple but effective damage boosting skill, synergizes well with Element of Surprise and Fog Barrel. You'll almost always be at max stats without too much effort to maintain. Cheat Death is an amazing defensive first mate skill. With our water barrel cooldown sitting at 3.7 seconds, you'll always have this skill available to you right when you need it, buying you valuable time to heal up and reposition as necessary. To finish off our top deck, we have one final component to look at: our mortars. This is a pretty flexible part of the build. There are a lot of viable choices that I went through before I settled on my final choice: these bad boys. A huge damage boost, a huge repair boost, a modest range boost, guaranteed triple explosive barrels, guaranteed triple water barrels, and guaranteed sticky grog chance. Let's run through each of these stats individually. 70% damage boost is a must. We already have such a high base diplomacy, so it would be a waste using anything other than the maximum damage mortar available. 70% repair takes our water barrel hull healing to a ridiculous 29k burst and 11.6k per tick over time. With our ship's hull sitting at 64.2k, we can fully heal ourselves with a single burst critical water barrel. If we don't get the crit, the heal over time is still significant enough we will heal to full in only a few ticks. All players in Windward Horizon have one-shot protection, even without Cheat Death or Death Ward, but it only applies when a hull is at or very close to 100%. So having our water barrel heals be so outrageously high means we are almost constantly being saved by the game's inbuilt one-shot protection, with Cheat Death from our first mate acting as a backup. An even better way to survive than one-shot protection is simply avoiding taking damage in the first place. So the plus 35% mortar range allows you to hit pirates without unnecessarily exposing yourself to too many of them at once. Not only is the plus 200% extra mortar chance free DPS that will often net you a free kill on some poor random pirate you were barely paying attention to, it can also be used to increase your single target damage. If you manually aim your mortar in front of a pirate ship, you can trick the game into firing your manual mortar plus an auto-targeted extra mortar at that same opponent, allowing you to deal double damage. It's far from guaranteed that both mortars will result in a direct hit, and sometimes it's even difficult to get that second auto mortar to fire off. But with practice, you can be consistent enough to make this technique worthwhile. It does require you to turn auto-targeting off, so if our earlier discussion around fog wasn't enough to convince you, hopefully this will. Triple water barrels are just easy group utility. With a cooldown of 3.7 seconds, you can keep yourself and your allies alive through almost anything. Sticky grog chance I could take or leave, but my preference here is either to be at 0% chance or 100% chance, so I know exactly how the grog is going to behave when it lands. With 0% sticky grog chance, you want to aim considerably in front of the pirates in order to maximize their time in the fire. But because you know that grog's going to hit the water and stay there, you don't have to worry about the fire moving towards you and self-damaging. With 100% sticky grog chance, you can aim directly at a pirate, but then you have to take care that pirate isn't going to set you afire with your own sticky grog. I'm very happy dealing with either of these scenarios if I know ahead of time what's going to happen, but having a luck-based chance on which one is going to happen is not ideal for my playstyle or my preference. So in this case, we've opted for the guaranteed sticky grog. Now we need to address the spider in the room. Minus 30% mortar reload. Earlier in the video, we discussed the tight timing of firing off multiple mortars within a 4-second element of surprise window. And the reason that timing is so tight is due to these mortars having minus 30% reload. We could absolutely swap out one of our mortars for one that gives us a better reload, but then we run into the sticky grog conundrum where we don't know how many mortars our ship is going to fire, we don't know if the grog will be sticky, we don't know how many water barrels we are going to fire off. If you like the sound of having more time to execute your skill rotation, I'd definitely recommend swapping out one of the 2 Galleon mortars with a neutral one or one that is green for the reload stat. For me personally, because I know it's theoretically possible to pull off our skill rotation with these mortars, and I really like removing percentage-based proc chances from my build, I have decided to keep these mortars equipped and will continue to torture myself with only having 0.3 seconds to spare in our 4-second element of surprise rotation. Let's cover something simple, our skill point distribution. All 50 are in the support tree. It's given us everything we need and boosting the exact stats we want boosted. There is an alternative version of this build that invests points into the armor boosting nodes of the defense tree, but we'll save that analysis for a completely separate build video, just something to keep in mind. As I'm writing the script for this video, my good friend Muir tempted me into a 4-skull instance, and I took the opportunity to swap my usual faction choice of Consulate and instead try out Exchange. And the results of that little experiment reaffirmed to me how good Consulate perks are for this build. Not only are the Consulate damage boosting perks of plus 20% diplomacy and plus 20% larger AoEs outshining the Exchange plus 20% mortar damage, the Consulate plus 20% hull repair is responsible for so many instances of immediate full hull repair, reactivating our one-shot protection and keeping us alive through multiple Pirate King barrages. So to conclude the faction choice, Consulate is love, Consulate is life. Now that covers everything in-game we wanted to talk about, but let me give you one final gift of knowledge that helped me min-max my diplomacy build and can help you also. This is my DPS calculator, designed to help determine the optimal balance of stats between armor, luck, and diplomacy to maximize your damage output. Link in the description so you can play around with it yourself. This is specifically set up for diplomacy builds running shrapnel to help you find that ideal stat distribution. Do up your build in game, plug its stats into the input cells, let the spreadsheet calculate your DPS, then compare it to any alternative builds you can think of and see which one comes out on top. A general observation I have made playing around with many diplomacy builds is that it's better to boost your raw damage stat, diplomacy, instead of boosting your luck stat. Because diplomacy builds are stuck at 120% critical damage multiplier, we simply just get better damage scaling by boosting our base diplomacy than we do eking out a few more percentage points of critical chance. And thanks to the calculations in this spreadsheet, and also thanks to my buddy Kilkenny, we've been able to optimize the original build presented to you even further. You will have to forgive me for not going back and redoing all the animations, but the core concepts all remain the same. The first change is swapping these two diplomacy crews for ramming crews. Whilst these guys do have a negative diplomacy stat, because we have so much plus diplomacy from adjacency bonuses, it only drops our total down to 701%. And what we get in return is a massive boost to mobility, a moderate boost to haste, and a moderate boost to armor. Now we could cease the changes here and have a faster ship with basically the same damage, but I want more boom. So thanks to the mobility we get from our crews, let's swap out our plus mobility hull pieces for a plus 53% armor pieces instead, which boosts our shrapnel damage even higher. The cumulative result of all these changes is 2.5k increase to our shrapnel buffed mortar tooltip. It might not seem like a lot, but when you add on Lucky Coin, Element of Surprise, Critical Strikes, or even Pirate King buff crates, that small increase in our base damage can translate to tens of K's worth of damage done in a single hit, or hundreds of K's worth of damage done over the course of a whole instance. Again, shout out to Kenny for inspiring this small but definitive improvement to the build. And there you have it, a full deep dive deconstruction into my Diplomacy Galleon build, and why it be how it do be. Remember, you don't need to min-max a ship to participate in any of the content in Windward Horizon. Make sure that whatever you end up doing with your Galleon is something you enjoy, and not just because some guy with too much time made a too long video about it. If you'd like early access to all my builds before I've made a video on them, or just want to ask some questions about Windward Horizon, please do join my Discord, linked in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys out on the 7 seas.